The E-2 application process allows for the applicant to either apply with the U.S. Embassy in their home country, or if they're in a valid non-immigrant status in the U.S., they may be potentially eligible to apply for a change of status in the United States. Now, between these two options, there are significant differences, and decision on where to apply should be based on a full understanding. Now, typically, for most treaty nationals, applying for obtaining the E-2 visa from the U.S. Embassy in home country will result in an E-2 visa issue for up to 5 years. Now, the duration of E-2 visa is dictated by the individual treaty between the U.S. and with each individual treaty country. The maximum granted is 5 years. Some E-2 treaty from some nationality is a shorter period of time. I'll give you some examples, like, for example, Canadians and British nationals, a Pakistani national, are eligible for the maximum 5-year E-2 visa, whereas like Mexican nationals are eligible for 4-year E-2 visa, Sri Lankans 3 years, Dutch people 3 years, Singaporean, Swedish citizen 2 years. The consulate E-2 visa usually allows multiple entry travel authorization. For some people, that's very important to have the ability to travel in and out of the U.S. freely during the validity period of the E-2 visa. Now, of course, there are exceptions. Some E-2 treaties, such as the treaty for Egypt, Jordan, have very limited single entry E-2 visa, and those are not very attractive, but those are the minority. So for folks that have travel need and may potentially be eligible for a 5-year E-2 visa, it makes a lot of sense to directly apply for and obtain their E-2 visa from the U.S. Embassy. Well, once the embassy is satisfied with the documentation through their initial review and invite the applicant to schedule the interview appointment, then the applicant would select the appointment usually through an online calendar, and then attend that interview with him or herself and any dependent family members. Assuming all goes well, the applicant gets an approval, then the embassy will keep the passports to print the visas, and typically will mail back the E-2 visas with the passport to the applicant's designated delivery location within a week, sometimes 2 weeks if the embassy is super busy, but typically within a week. So the whole E-2 visa processing time with the U.S. Embassy typically ranges from 1 to 3 months. It could be a lot longer. There are certain U.S. embassies where they're taking a lot longer time because they were impacted by COVID. So there's a lot of variables with that, and over the more than 100 U.S. embassies worldwide, that processing time is quite variable. The other option is for folks who are here in a valid non-immigrant visa status. They can potentially choose to apply for change of status to E-2 investor directly in the United States with the USCIS. This change of status is a submission of the E-2 application documentation to the U.S. immigration agency called the USCIS. The full name is United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and we refer to as USCIS. The application for change of status will be submitted to the USCIS, and it's purely a document submission process. There's no interview normally. And U.S. immigration will make a decision based on the documents alone in great majority of the situation. If they have questions, they can issue what's called a request for additional evidence to provide additional supporting documents to satisfy their concerns. But ultimately, they will make a decision based on the documents alone. And the convenience of that is everything is done in the U.S. There's no interview at the embassy because the application is directly with U.S. immigration domestically in the U.S. And there's an option to request expedited premium processing with the extra fee. That's very attractive. But keep in mind, there is a downside to getting a change of status approval, which the biggest disadvantage is that change of status E-2 approval is merely a permission to stay in the U.S. while the change of status approval is valid. Change of status approval doesn't provide any authorization to leave the U.S. and come back. It is merely a permission to stay in the U.S. while the E-2 investor remains in the U.S. As soon as E-2 investor or any dependent family members depart the United States, that change of status approval is automatically canceled. And the applicant would have to reapply for the E-2 visa with the U.S. Embassy in their home country before he or she can come back into the United States. So for folks that have travel needs, whether they have family members back home or they have businesses to attend back home, and traveling is a necessity, then change of status probably is not the best choice.